Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Sydney. I am currently 25 years old, living in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, and I'm so grateful to have you tuning in today. So thank you so much for clicking on this video and stopping by, and I hope you find it useful. In today's video, I am going to be talking about my biggest financial mistakes / learning opportunities that I have experienced in my early 20s, and am some of them just learning now. And I want to share these with you so that you don't have to make these same mistakes. Before I dive into this video, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who tuned into my first YouTube video. I honestly was shocked at how many people watched it, how many people supported, gave a like, or commented on it. Especially being my first YouTube video, I was expecting like 20 people to watch it. So when I got over 3,000 of you guys watching and 40 of you guys commenting on the video, it was unreal to me. And I really think it just goes to show how many people are really curious to see how other people are spending their money and just like really wanting to work on their finances for 2026. So I'm very grateful for you tuning in. You know, I started this channel really to create more transparency and to share my financial journey because I think that we can all grow and learn together. In my household growing up, money was always a very fear-based mindset. We never really talked about our money. And then I never was taught this in school like the majority of us. And I also never really felt comfortable going to a financial advisor because I never really felt like they had my best interest at heart. I always felt like they were trying to sell me something or get a commission. So because of that, I really leaned on YouTube as I could learn from everyday normal people just like myself and just like you, and learn from our real experiences, real mistakes, our lessons, and what was working, what wasn't working. And take all of those thoughts from all of these different people, whether that's experts, regular, everyday people like you and me, and take what would work for my situation and use that. And so I created this channel because I've been really fascinated by money. And truly, I really only started taking my finances super seriously and being very deliberate and intentional with my finances over about the last 4 or 5 months. And I've gone full deep dive mode, reading all of the books, listening to all the podcasts, watching all of the videos, learning from both experts and, like I said, everyday people like myself on YouTube. And the further down the rabbit hole I go, the more I realize just how important our finances are and how much the decisions we make at such a young age can impact us so far down the line, and how important that is. So I want to share what I'm learning, the mistakes, the wins, and everything in between. So many of you guys on YouTube here have inspired me and helped me grow. And my hope is to create a space that does the same for others, a place where we can learn together, a place where we can grow together and take ownership of our futures. So before I dive into my financial mistakes, I really think it's important to set the scene and share a little bit about my story and what eventually led to some of these financial mistakes. So let's set the scene. I'm 19 years old, just graduated from high school about a year or so before this, and I was working a job that I was just quite frankly not super happy with, commuting a long way, and just didn't really feel aligned with where I was at in life. Again, just trying to figure it out as a 19-year-old. I didn't really know what the heck I was doing. Still trying to figure it out, as most of us are. But with that being said, I ended up moving to a place I had never been before, and it was very spontaneous. Like, I'm talking, made the decision, and 2 weeks later, I had moved out. I had absolutely no savings behind me, and I didn't even have a job lined up until a week before I moved there. I had traveled there for a day, and I went and handed out my resumes to a bunch of places, found a job, and then found this beautiful rental, which is why I moved there. It was on the ocean. It sounded like a dream. Now, it was about $1,100-$1,200 at the time, which for me, again, I had no savings, was a lot of money. So I had to figure it out really fast if I wanted to make it work. So I ended up getting my one job, and eventually everything just became a lot. And I didn't really know what to expect in terms of living expenses. So I ended up having to work about 3 or 4 jobs. It consumed most of my days. I didn't have a lot of free time, but it also taught me a lot. So on one hand, I would say that was a mistake for sure. I'm not really including that as one of my financial mistakes, but if I could go back in time and still have the exact same life and everything that's led up to where I am today, I most likely would do that. However, I would probably stay on my parents for a little bit longer, try to save up as much money as possible, and have a better plan and be a little bit more intentional. But that being said, moving out was one of the biggest blessings, has taught me so much, led to some of the most beautiful friendships I have now. And also just I had so many incredible experiences and learning opportunities that I don't think I would have had otherwise, having to figure it out on my own and moving away from my parents. So that was a huge lesson for me, and really is what set the scene to eventually led me to where I am today in life. So, like I said, I was working 3 or 4 jobs. And at this point, I was genuinely scraping by. COVID just happened. I got laid off from my job, which was in the hospitality industry. I didn't really have a lot going for me. I didn't really know what to do. I was still paying rent. So I had to figure it out really quickly. And quite genuinely, I wasn't sure how I was going to put food on my table. I actually remember one moment so clearly where I was just trying to pay bills and trying to get ahead, but feeling like I could never get ahead. And I went to go through a drive-through and get food for myself. And I remember going through this drive-through, paying for my food, and my card declined, and I realized I had no money. And this was one of the most embarrassing and heartbreaking moments for me. And I remember leaving the drive-through being like, I'm sorry, I can't take the food. I can't afford it. And I made up probably something like, oh, I'm not sure what's going on with my bank. And I drove off, and I just remember like bawling my eyes out because I was like, I can't even afford $9 for food. Like, how pathetic is this? And so I was scraping by, and I had, I was working 3 or 4 jobs at the time. So I was like, why can't I get ahead? I'm literally trading all of my time for money right now. This feels like so much and feels impossible. So this is where one of my first financial mistakes comes into play. So eventually, it wasn't long after I went through that drive-through and I wasn't able to pay for my food, where I had hit just an absolute rock bottom. I had no idea how I was going to pay for things, and I was just feeling fed up. I was so drained, so exhausted from working literally morning to night a lot of the times and trying to pick up side hustles and trying to figure out how I was going to make money. I had a pet sitting business. I was doing social media marketing. I was working as an assistant, and I was also working in a coffee shop and running all over the place, just trying to keep my head afloat. And also because I was pet sitting, I was always staying at other people's homes, and I wasn't at my own home that I was paying rent for. So it felt a little silly. Eventually, I was on the phone with my brother, and he had this really great job he had just gotten up in another province working on a construction project, where he was like, yeah, I'm making like $12,000-$13,000 a month. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I don't know anything about construction. I was as green as it gets, okay? But I was willing to do literally anything so I could try and change my situation. And so this is where my first financial mistake comes into, which at first seems really great, but I'll get into this in more detail in a second here. But I ended up calling up his foreman, being like, hey, how can I get on this job? Like, I really want to get up there and work and make this much money. It went a little different than that. My brother ended up putting me in touch. But nonetheless, a couple weeks later, I ended up leaving all of my jobs that I was doing, which was so stressful because I had a lot of people, social media or pet sitting gigs that were all lined up and booked that I had to reschedule or find other people to cover. And so I felt really bad. But on the same hand, I had to really look after myself, my own mental health, and my own finances so I could take care of myself. So I did that. That took me a little bit to figure out and was so stressful, and ended up getting this job up in this other province and was able to go join my brother on his same crew, and eventually started making $12,000-$13,000 a month. And it was absolutely crazy to me that I was making this much money. And I was learning so much too, because I was as green as they get. I was one of very few girls on this construction site with little to no experience, but it was one of the best experiences I could have had because it taught me so much. But that being said, it ended up being one of the biggest financial mistakes that I made. So I went from barely surviving to what I considered making really good money. And on top of that, it was also a camp job. So had my food covered, I had my housing covered, and then my transportation were all covered. And in theory, this should have been the perfect setup to get ahead. But here's what ultimately went wrong and where I went wrong. So in between jobs, I'd be up there normally for a month or two at a time, depending on how long the job was. We'd work 6 days on, 1 day off, and I would still be up in camp. And so when that job would finish, I'd come home and I get to spend time with family and friends. And normally that would be for a couple weeks, maybe a month. It depended on kind of the season. But because I wasn't working, I wasn't bringing in income, which meant I wasn't bringing in income. I wasn't getting paid. So I had to live off the money that I had gotten paid within that month or two prior, which sounds manageable, right? Well, wrong when you don't really have the proper financial systems in place and you're just not really sure how to manage your money properly. So I didn't truly value my money yet, and I didn't have the discipline or the systems, and I kept telling myself, well, I deserve this. So I would treat myself. And over this year or so that I was working this job, I ended up traveling, and I took my mom on our dream trip to Nashville, and I went to Costa Rica with one of my childhood best friends. And I don't regret those experiences whatsoever because they were like the most memorable experiences I could have ever gone on. And I'm so grateful I did that and had that opportunity to do that. But then I kept spending, kept shopping, and my lifestyle inflation just went up. So my income went up and the way that I was spending went up because I wasn't used to making this money. So I wanted to kind of take advantage. I felt like I deserved it. I work really hard. I'm stuck in camp for months at a time. I wasn't tracking anything. I wasn't paying close attention to what was going out versus what my actual bills and my future needs were. And by the time everything was said and done, I had inflated my lifestyle so much that I ended up right back where I started, making more money, but still feeling extremely stuck. And what I really wish I had done was save and invest a significant portion of that income. So to put it in perspective, let's say I worked for 8 months and made about $96,000. If I had invested just half of that, so $48,000, into something like the S&P 500, which historically averages about 10% give or take on an annual return, 4 years later, that total could have grown to about $52,800. So an extra 4 or 5 grand, give or take. However, if I had left that invested alone for another 21 years, so 25 years total, it could have grown to roughly $328,000 by the time I'm 47. And that's without investing another single dollar. And that's crazy. That's a long time to have money sitting compounding. And the realization is what really changed my mindset ultimately, because lifestyle inflation doesn't just steal your money, it steals your future opportunity as well. So that is my first mistake. If you are in a position where you get a raise, you get a new opportunity, where you get a salary increase, or you're making more money, if you can keep your lifestyle costs to the same, and then that difference between what you are now making versus how much you're spending, and taking that money and investing it or saving it and just being a little bit smarter with it, can really change your future, because now that money could potentially be compounding, and it can also act as like a buffer and kind of give you a little bit more security. So if I could go back in time, that is what I would do in that situation. However, it was a great learning opportunity and a mistake I do not think I will ever make again. Okay, so because of my lifestyle inflation now, my mistake number 2 was that I started getting used to making more money, and when I wasn't working that job anymore and I made a career change into something that was a little bit more sustainable and didn't have all of these project-based jobs where they weren't guaranteed, I eventually started to lean on credit cards to fund my lifestyle. Now, I wasn't using it all the time, but I went from scraping by, but at least being debt-free, to slowly accumulating debt over time. Before I really noticed what was happening, I had about $20,000 in debt on credit cards. And the scary part is that it didn't happen all at once, and it happened quietly, little by little. And at that time, I truly didn't understand the full implication of credit cards. I understood that you had to be smart, pay your monthly payments, and to me, that sounded manageable. But then it's easy to just start spending and making justifications. And I also just didn't have the proper knowledge of how deadly they can be in terms of the interests, the fees, and how quickly things can spiral if you're not staying on top of payments. And I just didn't realize how mentally and emotionally suffocating credit cards can feel. And so a couple of months ago, I did a full 2025 audit. And keep in mind, I really only started getting serious about my finances, towards the end of the year. And I also had some help from my parents to pay down a portion of my debt. And I say that because I want to be as transparent as possible on this channel. I think that's so incredibly important to recognize my privilege in this situation. I'm so beyond blessed that they were able to help me out with a portion of it because it's definitely provided a huge relief off my shoulders. But I want to talk about my 2025 audit. Now, I had a massive wake-up call here. All of the small, seemingly insignificant service fees and charges and interests that I had been paying over the year added up to about $6,000 in 1 year. That's 11.3% of my total income from 2025 gone just to fees, which honestly just blew my mind because these are things that I just don't think you pay too much attention to. The average person, you're like, oh, it's like $10 here, $20 there. But when you actually do the math and start becoming really aware of your finances, those things can add up really quick. And the more they're adding up and adding on to your cards, the interest payments are getting higher. And it becomes, again, just so suffocating because you just can't keep up with this debt. And that's exactly the place that I got to. I was like, I don't know how to pay off this anymore because I'm not making enough to pay down these cards. So I can only pay this minimum, but it's just scratching the surface of the entire payment. So I had been really unaware, and if I could go back in time, I never would have opened up those credit cards without having a strong financial buffer, having clear systems in place, and having real discipline. Yes, points and rewards can be absolutely great if you know how to manage it well, but they mean nothing if you're losing 11.3% of your total income, like this girl over here. So personally, I would rather have no credit cards at all than to repeat that cycle. So I've actually canceled my credit cards now that I have them paid off, which again, I'm so grateful for, and it feels really good to have them paid off. I still have a couple other forms of debt, but I have that awareness now and realizing how suffocating and how quietly it can just add up is really scary because I thought I was good with money. I thought I could handle it. I was like, I'll be good. But truthfully, don't do it. Don't do it. And that leads me into my third financial mistake, which was not having proper financial awareness of understanding where my money was going, what my spending habits were, where I'd spent the most money versus where I wasn't spending a lot of money because I wasn't tracking every single dollar. So if there's one thing I've learned, and is this: you need to track your expenses. You need to understand your own psychology around money, understanding where you're spending your money, where you have room to improve, understanding what situations trigger your spending habits. And I know that it can be so scary and daunting to want to look at your banking app and look at your statements and understand your spending. Because if you're anything like me, there can often be a lot of shame associated with your money and your spending habits. Tracking my expenses has truly been one of the most empowering things I could have done for myself and one of the best financial decisions ever that I could have made, because for the first time I truly understand where my money is going and I'm finally in the driver's seat of my own financial outcome in the future. I can make informed changes now because instead of just guessing or hoping that things will magically work themselves out, I make it happen because I have the numbers and the understanding of where my money is going, how much I'm bringing in versus how much is going out. And to tell you a little story, because I've only gotten really serious about my spending habits in the last 4 or 5 months, I actually did a 2025 financial audit and seeing where I was spending all my money in all of these different categories. And it actually shocked me. One of the craziest things was that if I hadn't tracked my expenses and done that financial audit, I never would have known about that $6,000 in service fees, and I wouldn't have been able to fix the problem. I also uncovered some other spending categories that completely shocked me that I wasn't, I didn't realize I was spending. For instance, groceries and eating out, I was spending almost $700, $800 a month, which like, you're like, how do you not know that, Sydney? Well, again, $20 here, $15 here. Like, it doesn't seem like a lot at the time. It seems very insignificant, but over the course of a year, over the course of a month, like that all adds up immensely. And so if I didn't track my expenses, I wouldn't have been able to fix that problem and been more aware. So yeah, if you're curious to see what my breakdown was on a few of those other categories, go check out my last video of how I live off $3,400 a month, where I break down some more of those in detail in terms of my own spending. And that leads me into my fourth financial mistake, which was financing a car. Now, because I didn't have the best financial awareness, I didn't have the best spending or saving habits, I really hadn't planned or saved up for a new vehicle, and the vehicle I was driving at the time, a couple of years ago, was on its last legs, and I remember the day vividly. I took it into the shop because it needed some work, and a day or so later, I get a call from the guy working at the shop who called me, and he said, "Hey, Sid, just want to let you know that I am not going to put your car in for servicing. It really doesn't make sense for you to spend this money on fixing the car when it's really at the end of its days, and I don't feel comfortable fixing it and charging you this large amount of money when it makes more financial sense to go and get a new car at this point because it's at the end of its life." So I really appreciated his transparency and honesty. But it also sent me into this spiral panic mode because I was like, well, I have nothing saved for a car, and I have to figure out this car situation on my own because now I'm living on my own and I'm in a new area. So I definitely went into panic mode, and I ended up going to the dealership to look at cars. And I did inevitably, to my credit, know that buying a brand new car was out of the equation because I knew that the depreciation and the value would drop about 10% as soon as you drive it off the lot. So I got a used car. I got a car that was about 5, 6, 7 years old, and it was new to me. However, when I went in, I didn't have the awareness of like crunching the numbers and seeing what I could really afford. And like most people, still buying from a dealership is not the best choice, especially if you have to finance, which is what I did. And I went in because I didn't have a ton of extra money to spend every month. I went with the longest term. I went with the smaller payment that I could. And ultimately, it tacked on a ton of interest on my car. So I really regret financing my car because I could have saved so much money and put that money towards, an investment or something that would actually compound instead of losing me money. So I love my car. It is definitely reliable. It's a great vehicle. But overall, it ended up costing me a lot of money in a painful amount of interest. And to put things in perspective, when I got my car, I think it was about $16,000 from the dealership. And it was definitely worth that, I think, at the time when I did buy it. But what I wish I had done was save up that $16,000. Or in a perfect world, I would have saved up that $16,000 and paid cash for it instead of financing it. Because as soon as I financed it and had such a long term and small payments every month, it probably tacked on about $10,000, $12,000 worth of interest over the time of my term, which is a lot of money. And if I could have taken that money and thrown it again into the S&P 500, which is like a 10% annual return, that would have been a much smarter financial decision to have made. But it's one of those things, you live and you learn, and I have looked in different scenarios to sell it. At this point and where I'm at, it makes more sense to keep it so I don't end up losing money. However, I'm still weighing out my car situation. So that is something that I definitely regret, and I don't think I will ever finance a car again. I am trying to save some money and put myself in a better situation because inevitably, at some point in my life, I will need a new car because it won't last me my entire lifetime. I'm hoping it lasts me at least 10 years so that I can run it into the ground and really get my money's worth. But I will be saving up for a new car in the future, and I will not be financing a car because there's so much interest and unnecessary amounts of money that gets tacked on to a car, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially for such a depreciating asset like a vehicle. All right, and following my fourth mistake of financing a car is my fifth mistake, which is financing a new phone. So I'm not sure if you're like me, but I know a lot of people get sucked into this wanting to upgrade to the latest and greatest technology every couple of years or every year when a new iPhone comes out. For me, I fell into one of those traps and have for a majority of my life with having a phone. And honestly, this is one of those things that completely feels so normal because like everybody around you does it and it doesn't feel like it's, that bad. And that's because of how the phone companies structure it. Now, I will say this, in my last video, I got a lot of crap because I pay about $110 a month for my phone. And a lot of people that watch my video were from the States, which you guys seem to have really great plans because a lot of you were like, yeah, I spend $25 a month on my plan. Like, why aren't you using this company? First off, I don't have those companies where I am, and that's quite unheard of. And the majority of people I know that I've asked are spending about $60, $70 a month for a phone plan, and that's at the very base. That's not including if you were to finance a phone. So this is one of those things for me that I've fallen into because, well, let me break it down. I'm going to break you down how the companies and the phone companies do it and how they've gotten me. So the plan that I'm currently on carries a structure, and a lot of phone plans or phone companies, providers carry the same structure because they know that they can get you. They give you this very enticing phone plan, which often looks appealing on the surface and is like $0 down. You get a brand new phone, so the latest and greatest technology, and you just have to pay one simple monthly payment a month that gets tacked onto your monthly phone bill of $60, $70 in my case right now. But what's not made very clear to you, or it is made clear to you, but it just sounds so appealing, you're like, sure, I'll do that, is that you don't actually own the phone. And in my case, my company owns the phone for the full term of the contract, but I'm paying for the phone. So it's kind of like a lease to own kind of deal. So by the time my plan ends, I'm given two options, which is to pay the difference to buy the phone now, which is usually around $800, $900. Mine works out to about $900 when I was just reading my contract the other day. Or give the phone back and let the company decide what it's worth, which is almost always significantly less than the buyout amount. So, and this is where it gets most people, and myself included in this, is like, I'm like, I don't want to fork out $800, $900. That sounds crazy just to keep a phone that they've already been paying for when now there's newer and better models available. So instead they hand the phone back and are now without a device, and they get, the very difference of the little of what the company pays for you, or your provider will pay you back for that phone. And it feels logical because then you finance another phone. You end up with $0 down, a new contract, but you're now in this same cycle. So now you're spending this large amount of money over top of your phone bill for a phone that you don't even own. And again, in my situation, I'm paying $110 a month. So for my phone plan, instead of my normal phone plan rate, which is $70 a month. So, and that's if I own my phone outright. So that's an extra $40 every single month. And over a 2-year contract, that is $960 going towards a phone that I don't even own. And so in reality, you're paying more monthly, you're never building ownership of that phone, and you're staying locked into a cycle that benefits the carrier and not you. If I had just bought my phone outright and even a used or slightly older model, paired it with a lower monthly plan, I would have saved thousands of dollars over the years. So now I know when that time comes and my contract ends, I still have a few different options I need to weigh out because I think I might get a bit of a phone discount from the company that I work for now. So I'm going to try and look into that, which would be great. But ultimately, I'm probably going to do it the buyout option, $800, $900. Then I own my phone, and then hopefully I will never be roped into financing a phone again, and I can hopefully get my phone down to that $70 a month for the actual phone plan, or try and see if they'll reduce it a little bit more, and then that will save me some money, and I'll actually own my phone. And so hopefully I can keep this phone for quite a while, and I'm not upgrading until something happens to this phone or I really, really need to. But yeah, that is a trap that I have fallen victim to, and a lot of people have with financing a phone. And my sixth and final financial mistake that is seemingly small but adds up really, really quick is signing up for free trials and then ultimately forgetting about them and then having them charge your bank account on a monthly basis. And because I wasn't tracking my expenses, I wouldn't notice until months later that I'm like, oh, I'm being charged for this like weird app. I don't even remember signing up for it, but like here it's charging me like $50 in the last 5 months for like streaming platforms, apps, subscriptions, random tools I thought I might use one day. And, on their own, they don't seem like a really big deal because you're like $9.99 here, $14.99, $24.99. But when you stack them up, especially over an entire year, they become a really, really big problem. So what made things worse for me is that I wasn't intentionally choosing these expenses. They were just happening passively without awareness. And money you don't consciously decide to spend is often the most expensive money of all. So once I started tracking every dollar, these subscriptions became impossible to ignore. So canceling them was one of the fastest ways I freed up extra cash without actually like sacrificing anything meaningful. So, I think the saying goes, small leaks will sink the ship if you're not paying attention. So truly, if you can stay on top of your subscriptions, don't sign up for anything unless you like truly know you need it, or at least set yourself like a reminder so that 6 days comes along and you remember to actually cancel that if you're not using it, because those small payments certainly do add up very, very quickly. That all being said, those are my 6 financial mistakes. If you found this video useful or helpful, feel free to give it a like, hit subscribe, stay tuned for more lifestyle and financial videos. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm so excited to progress on this journey of sharing my own financial learnings with you in hopes that we can all grow together, learn, and empower ourselves for our future.